Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of run-down no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
My Bigfoot sighting started about 10 years ago. I would probably like to preface everything up front that all of this has happened in the same area, which is interesting, and it's been very consistent over those 10 years. So I grew up in Haywood County, which is in western North Carolina. Part of my family is Cherokee, which is pretty typical around this area. And there's also a lot of people that make those claims, but I spent part of my childhood off and on the reservation. I still spend a lot of time out that way, even as an adult. And a lot of the women on my mom's side of the family have always been very spiritual and connected to stuff. So I was raised to be very open that there might be stuff out there that we don't know about. So that, I feel like when you're receptive, you're always going to allow things in a little easier, a little better. Whereas if you weren't, you're going to be more prone to either not thinking about it, not discussing it, or just shutting it out altogether. And the area I grew up has had a lot of Cherokee history. I grew up just very, very shortly down the road from the Garden Creek Mound, which is a pretty significant Cherokee site. The Devil's Courthouse, which, interestingly enough, will come into play a couple of times later on, is just a few minutes up the road from where I grew up and where I actually moved back to recently and currently live. And even as a kid, my grandmother was always very reticent about me going up to the Devil's Courthouse. She never said why. And the Devil's Courthouse, if anyone watching doesn't know, it's on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and it's this massive rock formation that you can park and view it, or you can even hike up to the top of it. And originally, there's still some debate because a lot of, as with most Native American history, a lot of it is oral history. So there's some debate between what the original stories were, what the colonized stories were, but a lot of it is accepted that what's called the Judaculla lived up there. And he's what is considered as a not always friendly giant. And he's just a giant man as they describe it. And sometimes they describe him as having hair and slanted eyes and a lot of other descriptive things. But as more settlers moved in, more white people moved in, they said that the Devil's Courthouse is where the devil held this court. And there's all kinds of stories about how at nighttime the devil comes out and walks around on the mountain, and ghosts and spirits are up there. So it's just an eerie place anyway. And I spent my whole life going up there, and there were always weird little odd things that happened, but especially when I was younger, I would go up there with family. You know, it was always just creepy, and my grandmother would always kind of just be like, I don't want to be up here. But as with a lot of people of Native origin, she wasn't really open about just talking about it to anybody. So about 8 or 9 years ago, I had just really started getting into Sasquatch and Bigfoot research, I guess is what you could call it, and becoming open to the fact that that may be out there and that that's a possibility. But I think, as with most people that start this path, you know, you kind of just are totally blind. You just kind of run into it and hope that you find the right trail. So this was around the time that Finding Bigfoot was big on TV. And I had a friend of mine that has since moved away, but he was big into paranormal stuff, big into Sasquatch, and him and I kind of just lived for that sort of thing. X-Files, all that stuff. So one night we were at my house and we had another friend of ours with us. And I guess I need to also say that the third guy is very, very cut and dry. He is very skeptical. Everything is, if it's not tangible in front of his face and he can handle it, it's nonsense. So he was not open to any of this at all. He thought we absolutely were out of our minds for believing in this stuff, talking about this stuff. So we were all three just hanging out at my house, and I still lived at home at the time. And it was the dead of winter. It was cold. It was probably in the 20s. And this was probably 11 o'clock at night. We were bored. We had all stayed up late the night before and slept late, so our sleep schedules were totally off. And it was cold and icy, but we were bored. So we were like, what do we do? What do we do? And I just threw it out there as a joke. I said, let's ride up to the Devil's Courthouse. Let's go. And my friend Kim, the one that was skeptical, was just like, absolutely not. He's like, dude, it's 20 degrees outside. I'm not going up there in the woods in the middle of the night at 20 degrees. But my other friend was like, oh, let's do it. There'll be nobody up there. It's creepy. It's wintertime. It's cold. Let's do it. Let's do it. So we finally convinced Kim to go. We threw on all our cold weather gear and piled in the car. And from my house, it was about a 20-minute, 30-minute drive up through the Pisgah National Forest, up to where I believe the Transylvania and Haywood County line, and right at that crest of the ridge at the county line. But the county line is where the Blue Ridge Parkway intersects. And when it's wintertime, a lot of time they close the gates, so you can't actually drive on the parkway due to ice and snow and just inclement weather. So we got up there, and the gates were closed, which is what we kind of expected. And we thought, well, we'll just walk along the road. And so we parked. There was no one up there. We passed no vehicles on the way up. I mean, we were the only three people in miles and miles of just wilderness. So we got out of the car, and it's dead silent, just ear-ringingly silent. Like your ears are just ringing. It's so quiet. And it was 20 degrees at my house. Up here, it's probably in the single digits, like just bitterly cold. So we said, you know, we're just going to be up here about 10 minutes. I don't think we can handle any more. And we decided we actually didn't want to walk all the way to the Devil's Courthouse. So we said, well, there's an overlook on the other side of the gate, going the other direction, going south, because the Devil's Courthouse is going north on the parkway. This would have been going south. We said, there's an overlook right there. Let's just walk down this overlook, look at the view, because it's cold. It'll be really clear out. And so we walked probably 5 minutes to the overlook from the gate. And the road was totally clear. There was nothing in the road. We had our flashlights, and we were just shining them everywhere, looking at everything. And we get to the overlook, and we're sitting there, and then Jesse and I started talking about, you know, finding Bigfoot with them doing the tree knocks and the whoops and all this stuff. So we thought, let's do it. Let's just see. Let's just see if we get any kind of response. So we found just 2 big hardwood sticks, and they were froze, and we started whacking them on a couple of trees, and it just echoed. Felt like it echoed from just miles. And we did a couple of whoops like they do on the show, and it was silent. We thought, well, you know, whatever. So we turned around, head back to the car, and then we heard just way up on the mountain behind where we were. And we were like, what? Oh my God, there. We got it. We got one. And of course, you know, this is 10 years ago. We didn't think anything about recording it or anything like that, but we were like, wow, there we go. And it just, again, it's single digits. There was no one else out there. So it couldn't have been another person doing it just to be funny, like just to be entertaining. Like it couldn't have been. So we turn around and we start walking back because now we're creeped out. It's one of those things where you ask for it, and then when it happens, you're kind of like, okay, yeah, time to do it. So we turn around and we start walking back down the road, and we get about halfway between the car and the overlook. And there is just a whole tree, and it's probably, I don't know, maybe between 12 and 15 feet tall. And it was dead. It was a dead tree, but it had been totally uprooted, roots and all, just laying long ways down the middle of the road. And this part of the road, for if you've been up there, there's trees, but they're not close enough where if it fell over, it would fall in the road. Like it would fall on the bank above the road, or it would fall in the grass on the shoulder. And there was no wind. There was no breeze. It was quiet. It was still. And so here's this tree, branches, roots and all, laying right perfectly centered on the yellow line in the middle of the road, about halfway between the car and the overlook. And so this, coupled with the tree knock, we knew exactly what it was. We knew that, yeah, we need to leave. We've made something mad. We've irritated something. We've disturbed it. We need to go. And this is probably maybe about 3/4 of a mile from the Devil's Courthouse. So very, very close, right in there with it. Actually, the overlook that we were at, that we did the wood knocks, I believe is called the Courthouse Valley Overlook. So very, very close. So that was our very, very first encounter. That was the first encounter that made me go, okay, wow, there is something to this. This is a thing that people aren't just making this up when they talk about it. They're not doing this just for the attention. This is not just a creepy story that everybody's telling just to scare their kids. This is something that really happens. When people talk about wood knocks, when people talk about rocks and trees and stuff being thrown at them, like we kind of just, and we all three just kind of drove home in silence because we were just like, I can't, that actually happened. We were halfway doing it as a joke, and here something happened. And even Kim, as skeptical as he was just like, I have nothing. I have no explanation for that. So that was validating that the skeptic in the group was like, nah, that was, there's nothing else that could have been. If it had been the middle of summer, I would have been a little more inclined to be like, okay, it was somebody camping, messing with us. We were right on the road. But the fact that it was in like probably the single digits in the middle of winter, it's very unlikely what else it could have been. So fast forward about a year later, or not quite a year later, the following summer. So this was in the middle of winter. I don't remember what month it was, but that following summer, this was probably July or August. It was at the height of the warm season for us in North Carolina. My lifelong best friend, we've been friends since third grade, this 6'4", 320-pound Cherokee boy, his name's Hunter. We used to go about every single weekend, and we would either go hiking or camping or both, rain or shine. No matter what the weather, no matter what was going on, that was what we did on the weekends. We went hiking and camping all over the place. And so we decided that we were going to ride up to the Parkway or the Pisgah National Forest, right where it meets the Parkway, and go camp. And there had been a couple of spots that we had kind of scouted out that we thought, man, this is perfect. This is a perfect camping spot. So we loaded up the car, and it was afternoon. It was probably 1 or 2 in the afternoon. We rode up there, and right before you get to the Parkway, coming from our direction, there are these 2 gravel pull-offs. And one of them is pretty well known now. It wasn't as well known then. I would also like to add that the Blue Ridge Parkway and the Pisgah National Forest are a lot more crowded now than they were 10 years ago, 9 years ago. When we used to go and hike, you could hike on a Saturday in July and not see another person. Now it's a parking lot when you go. So people who have been now or recently, this all may seem like a shock, but people who grew up going up there, it makes more sense. But there are these two gravel parking lots, and I mean, there may be quarter mile apart from each other. And the upper parking lot, I say parking lot, they're gravel pull-offs. The upper pull-off, you pull off, and there's just this tiny little, almost like a game trail, straight off the bank. And if you pull off right there in the middle of summer, it's just a wall of bushes. And if you don't know that there's a trail and a campsite down in there, you're not going to go. It's just going to look like somewhere to pull off for a bathroom break or a water break or whatever. But we had scouted that, so we knew, wow, there's a good camping spot down in there. So that was our first choice. So we go up there, we pull in, and this is right below the gate to the parkway. This is still Pisgah National Forest land, though. And this is about maybe a mile and a half max on the road from the Devil's Courthouse. As the crow flies, this is 5 minutes, if that, not even 5 minutes, as the crow flies from the Devil's Courthouse. And this is right below the bank, maybe 150, 200 yards from where Kim and Jesse and I had our encounter the prior winter. So literally almost a stone's throw away, easily a gunshot away from where my first encounter was. So we park, and it's these eerie, gorgeous, like Scandinavian-looking pine forest where this campsite is. So we got our stuff. We hiked down to the bank and went down into this little bottom area on the creek. And it's at the top of a waterfall. And a lot of people now park and hike up to this waterfall. But there weren't really many people that did that then. You might come up there and see one car sitting there, and that was about it. But this parking area we were at is a single car. No one else can be there if you're parked there. So we go down, we set up, and we're trying to make our fire, and we just keep hearing there's a bank that's very steep, like probably 80 degrees up across the creek. And we keep hearing just these loud, they're not even twig snaps. They were branches break, just crack, crack, just every 5 minutes. And we both kind of were like, I just feel really weirded out being up here. There's just something, I feel like I'm being watched. And as much time as him and I had spent in the woods, I grew up hunting. My prior career really taught me a lot about intuition, listening to your gut feeling. And we both just were like, nah, my gut's telling me we need to leave. There's something like, feels like it's almost physically, viscerally pushing me out of this area. Like we are being watched, and I don't like this feeling. And actually, I've tried going back in there since a few times and hiking, and every time I'll get a couple 100 yards in on the trail, and I'm just like, oh, nah, there's just something, I feel like I'm going to come around the corner and see something I don't want to see. So we thought, well, let's go down to the other parking area, the bigger parking area that's right down the road around the corner, because that area when we've hiked in there before, didn't seem as creepy. So we put everything back in the car, got back in the car, and went to the lower area. And again, these are on the road, 2 minutes max, minute and a half. You literally get on the road, turn around, you go right around the corner, and there's the other parking area. And again, that trail leads up to the waterfall that the first campsite was at. So again, a couple 100 yards max. So we unload everything, go in there, you cross the creek, and there's this big flat area. And this is also pine forest. And the creek kind of wraps around. And where this area is, and now a lot of people have camped in there, so they've cut down a lot of the trees, they've cut down a lot of the rhododendrons, but it used to be a lot more thick in foliage. And the actual campsite where the fire and everything has been moved also since then. And the creek kind of wraps around, but then it hits this bowl, and it's several feet deep. It's probably 4 feet deep, I would say, and at least 10, 12 feet across. On the other side is a very, very steep embankment. And this is all pine forest, so it absorbs a lot of sound, and especially the pine needles on the ground. When you walk, Hunter, again, 6'4", 320 pounds, like he's a big boy, and he could move like a ninja on this. I mean, he could sneak up on a deer on this pine, and that's just how much sound it absorbed. We didn't feel any creepy feelings, so we set up our camp, and we cooked a little food. I don't remember what we cooked, but it wasn't anything too huge. And there were a couple of logs next to the fire that you could sit on. So we left a couple of our pots and everything on the log, and we had rinsed them out in the creek just to get the food residue out and not try to attract any bears, because we have a massive bear population in western North Carolina. They are everywhere here. And so if you also grew up here, you know what a bear looks like. Like if you grew up here, you know when you see something in the woods, you know it's a bear. Like you know what a bear looks like on its hind legs. You know what a bear looks like on all fours. You know what a bear's face looks like. You know what a bear's fur looks like. Like I have been closer to bears than I really would have been safe to have been close to them if they hadn't have snuck up on me, or I haven't snuck up on them. So we rinse our pots and pans out. We set a couple of them on the log to dry, and we took our leftover food, and we had a paper grocery bag, and it was one of the big ones with the handles. So we put our leftovers in plastic bags and then put them in that paper bag. And we had some paracord, so we looped the paracord and chucked the bag up in a tree and made it like a little pulley system just to get it off the ground so that the bears won't get to it. And the closest branch is a big, huge pine tree that was right about 15 feet away from where our fire was. And the closest branch had to have been 12 feet off the ground, at least. I would say between 10 and maybe 14 feet off the ground. So we were like, yeah, there's no bear getting to that unless it climbs the tree. And at this time, we didn't use tents when we camped. We just literally threw out a couple of blankets and our sleeping bags next to the fire and knocked out. And neither one of us drank. Neither one of us did any other substance. I mean, we did no substances at the time. Nobody did anything. So we were 100% totally sober. And we slept a few feet, probably 10 feet away from the fire this night. And we angled our sleeping bag so we were kind of facing with our heads up that steep hill. And we'd been asleep probably a few hours. It's probably 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm laying there in my sleeping bag, and I jar awake. And I don't know why. I'm laying there, and I'm like, what woke me up? And I'm laying there, and I hear footsteps. My first thought is, oh God, it's a bear. Oh crap, here we go. So, but then I listen, and as they get closer, they're coming from up the hill, up the mountain. And as they get closer, I'm like, no, those are 2 feet. That is bipedal. That's not quadrupedal, that's bipedal. These are 2 feet. And I thought, surely that's not a person. What is a person doing walking around out here? Pitch black darkness. It is darker than dark in these woods at night with no flashlight. I was like, this isn't going to go well. This is like, we're about to get the Hills Have Eyes axe murder out here in the woods. And I'm laying there and I'm listening. And it's kind of that thing where you don't want to move because you don't want them to know that you're awake. You don't want them to know that you're listening to them. And we always slept with some sort of weapon close by. And because of where this was, we didn't take any sort of firearms, but I had my machete stuck in the ground behind me, and Hunter had his axe. And we had both at some point angled where we both had our backs to the fire, and we're parallel to each other. We're a couple feet away, or a couple feet apart from each other, but we're both facing with our backs to the fire. And these footsteps get closer and closer, and they stop probably no more than 5 feet above our heads. And as they got closer, you could feel these footsteps. It was the way I describe it's like in Jurassic Park when they know the T-Rex is coming and the water is rippling, it's thumping. I feel like if you had a glass of water or a cup of water sitting on the ground, that's how that would have felt. Like that's how that would have looked. You would have been able to visually see. This was just massive, heavy footfalls. And that's when I kind of thought, that can't be a person. If that's a person, if Hunter can move silently on this, if that's a person making this much sound, they're 7 feet tall and 500 pounds. This person had to, they were massive. So I'm laying there just still. I could feel my heartbeat just in my throat. And I was just frozen. It was like a sleep paralysis. Like I couldn't move. I'm frozen. I'm just locked up. And I hear breathing. And it's this, I say ogre-ish because it's this like gargle when it breathes. Like it's heavy. But there's this rumble behind it. Almost like if you see the videos of people filming buffalo up close and they make this kind of just this rumble, just this, I can't even imitate it. And that's how it sounded. And I was just, it was one of those where even though I knew about Bigfoot, I knew about Sasquatch, that still for some reason did not enter my mind at this point. Like I was still set on the fact this was a person and this person was about to murder us. And now if that had happened, I would have been like, oh, yep, there he is, big guy. Like I would have still been scared out of my wits, but I wouldn't have been frozen, I don't think. Of course, I may have. We say a lot till it happens. So then I hear the breathing and I hear it like sniffing, just like any animal would do, just, and then it starts moving again. And I can feel these footsteps and it goes behind Hunter and I to the fire. And the fire has burnt down to just embers at this point. It's putting out a little light, but not much. And I hear our pots and pans clanging. I hear them clanging, almost like it's taking them and just hitting them together. Just pop, 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 pop. And I used to always say that the sound that it made was like when a baby's trying to like calm itself down. But now I actually describe it as like you see those funny videos of cats when they're like arguing and they make this like glue sound at each other. That's almost what it sounded like. It was this like back of the throat, back of the tongue, like like it. Again, I can't even imitate it because there was so much bass behind it. Like there was just more size behind it, if that makes sense, than what I can do. And at this point, I'm like, okay, this is not a person either. It's not a bear. It's not a person. I don't know what this is. Like I am baffled. So at this point, Hunter has also been awoken by this. And I can tell in the dark and I can hear he's inching his way backwards up to me. Like I could tell he didn't want to roll over to get my attention. So he's slowly kind of worm wiggling in his sleeping bag over to me. And he kind of elbows me through his sleeping bag and I elbow him back kind of like, yeah, I know. And we've been friends so long, it's almost like we have this like telepathic communication because he did that and I elbowed him back and I immediately knew he was about to jump up out of his sleeping bag with his flashlight. Like there's something just intuitively in my brain knew that's what he was about to do. So I inched my hand up and I slowly started zipping my sleeping bag. And I kind of take a mental note of where my machete is in case we have to fight. Not that either one of us would have done any sort of good against this thing. He could have just probably picked us up and bopped our heads together and that would have been the end of it. And then just boom, we just explode out of these sleeping bags. He has this bright LED flashlight. I snatch my machete and as the beam of this flashlight, as he levels this thing, this is probably a second and a half that it takes us to burst out of these sleeping bags and him to get that flashlight. I guess he had turned the flashlight on inside his sleeping bag, because when he came out, that flashlight, he was already wheeling it around at this thing. And in that second to a second and a half, it was like slow motion. This flashlight beam hits this thing, and in a second, it has cleared the probably 12 to 15 feet from the fire and our pots. It drops the pots in one, maybe two steps. It's at the pine tree with the food, reaches up with its left arm, one hand, snatches this bag out of the tree. And again, this is between 10 and 13 or 14 feet off the ground. So for him to be tall enough in his arm, he could just reach up. And I don't even think the arm was fully outstretched. I mean, it still was bent. I mean, it was like just palming a basketball, just boom, snatched. It had to have been 8 feet, 9 feet tall at the minimum. It snatches the bag. And again, it's been cleared out now, but there was just a wall of rhododendron right there where that tree was. And on the other side of that is that deep pool that's, again, probably 4 feet deep. And there was a trail on the other side, and then the mountain goes straight up. So for it to clear from the campsite 1 or 2 steps to the tree, snatch the bag out of the tree, and one step, we heard one kathoosh in the water. One step, he is now cleared all the way to the other side of the creek. And this is maybe a second and a half to 2 seconds flat. And we hear it just ripping up the mountain, up the bank. And consequently enough, the direction that it is headed, making a beeline at, is exactly where we had tried to camp earlier in the day and had the bad feeling and had heard the snapping. And if you had kept going even straighter, you would have run exactly into the spot in the road where the tree had been dropped the winter before. I mean, it's a straight line. If you looked at it on a map, you could literally draw a straight line, boom, 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 to these 3 spots. So when his flashlight hits this thing, and it's standing up, it's running to the tree, it was a wall of hair. And yeah, I hear some people say that it was hair, it wasn't fur, it was more akin to hair. My brain didn't process whether it was hair or fur, but it was solid. I don't remember seeing a neck. It was just shoulders and just a bump on the top for a head, kind of like what you see with, like with a gorilla. And it had to have been 4 feet wide at the shoulders, at least 4 feet wide. I mean, when I say its back was a wall of hair or fur. I literally mean it was a wall of hair. And it's interesting because when I was a kid, my aunt lived at home with my grandparents, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. And when I was a kid, she would always tell this story that everybody kind of laughed and joked at because it was funny. Because she always told this story about when she was probably in her early 20s, and this was probably in the 70s, maybe the 80s. One of her boyfriends dropped her off at the bottom of the road. And at that time, you couldn't drive all the way up to my grandparents. You had to walk. And so she's walking up the road in the dark, and she runs into something that she said was just a wall of hair. She said she got a mouthful of hair. And she said it was just a wall. My aunt was 6'1". She was a very, very tall woman. And she said she just like face planted into this wall of hair. And then it just ran off. And, people like my grandfather and people who were a little more skeptical said, oh, you ran into a cow, you ran into a horse. But again, this woman was 6'1". If a cow is 6'1" and has long enough hair for you to get a mouthful of it in the dark, that's a big cow. Same thing for a horse. So the wall of hair part is interesting because after Hunter and I's encounter, I thought, oh my God, that's what she meant by a wall of hair. And unfortunately, she's passed away, and she passed away several years before this encounter. So I couldn't go back and confirm that with her and talk to her about it. But she had a lot of experiences that were interesting, that now that I'm more open to these things, I wish that I could go back and talk to her about it. She had a couple of different dog man encounters. She was an interesting lady. But anyway, yes, this thing was a wall of hair. And it was black, cold black, even with this bright LED flashlight beaming on it from 20 feet away. It was just black as night. And I mean, I'm reticent to say it, but it's like when you see a black bear, like black bear black. But this thing could have picked up a black bear and carried it like we can a house cat. I mean, if this thing to a black bear would have been like one of us picking up a pug. I mean, there's no way this was a bear. And especially on two legs to clear total between our fire where it started and the other side of the creek, this is probably 30 feet. And it cleared this 30 feet in probably 5 steps. I mean, it cleared a 10 to 12 foot, 4 foot deep pond of water in one stride. I mean, and to this day, I'm baffled by it. I actually went back this summer. I rarely get time to spend a lot of quality time with my mom anymore just because of our work, but her and I, and she believes me. She's totally supportive because she's had experiences on her own. She's had experiences with me. So when I talk to her about these things, she totally is on board. I mean, every time she goes out of town, she always finds a Bigfoot sticker and brings it to me as a gift. So we rode up there this year, and we were talking about Sasquatch in the car, and she said, I want to see this spot where this happened with you and Hunter. So we parked and went in there, and I'm going back even now. I'm baffled by it when I stand there and look at this area and look at what happened. Like I relive it, but at the same time, I'm just like, it's insane. But I don't question it. That's the thing. Like it happened as clear as day. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like this happened. And I mean, I say I can't explain it, but I really can. I mean, this was a Sasquatch encounter. That's all it could have been. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It wasn't a figment of our imagination, especially with two of us seeing the exact same thing. The one thing I will say that, a lot of people report with these things is there was no smell. We didn't smell anything before or after. There was no smell like a lot of people report. It was all just sound and sight. So needless to say, when that happened, we just kind of froze for a second while we listened to it, just ripping up through the bushes, up the mountain. And then we kind of looked at each other and we're like, nope, time to go. So we threw water on the fire to extinguish it, threw everything in bags. We didn't even see whose was what or what was whose. We just threw everything in bags, got on the road, and drove back to my house. And we didn't say a word the whole way home. 25, 30 minutes home. We didn't say a word. We just drove in silence. So that was the second big encounter. That was the big visual encounter that I had. Now, the two newest encounters were far more recent. I had several other paranormal encounters since this one, but I didn't really have any more Sasquatch encounters, or at least encounters that I can attribute to it, definitely. Like, I haven't had many more of those until recently. So, in the probably 7 years since this encounter happened, I moved to another city and was in the city, and so I didn't really have any crazy encounters. But after a few years, I decided I was going to move back to my hometown. And both my grandparents have since passed away, and their house was sitting empty, so we renovated it. And that's where I decided to move into. And again, this is the house that right below it, right off the bank, I can look out of my kitchen window and see the spot that my aunt supposedly ran into this wall of fur. This house has always had paranormal encounters. And again, the women on my mom's side of the family were very sensitive to that. My grandmother was always sensitive. My mom's sensitive. One of my aunts was very sensitive. I really only had one aunt that wasn't. So there's always been encounters. There's always been experiences at this property. And it's kind of just been part and partial. People just say, yep, we've seen UFOs. Yep, we've seen orbs. Yep, we've seen ghosts. And it's just normal. And I think a lot of that comes with having a very intermixed family with a lot of native in the family. And a lot of just, if you know a lot of people that are deep in Appalachia, there's a lot of people like, yep, there's things in these woods we don't know about it. Don't talk about them. Just leave them alone. And it's just normal, everyday occurrences. And my grandfather grew up down the mountain right below where my house is. So this house in this area has been part of my family for several generations, way further back if you count the native part of my family. But as far as like the white settler part, at least to my great-great-grandparents. And my great-grandparents lived right down the road from where I live. My grandfather grew up there, but my great-grandfather had a story about walking up the road to go hunting, and he heard a baby crying, and he said there was no bones about it. This wasn't a cat. This was a child, a baby crying, calling for mama. And it was just in a thicket of bushes. And he goes up there thinking someone's set out their unwanted child in the woods, and he gets to the little thicket, and there's nothing there. And he would tell this story just as candid as you would talk about going to the grocery store. And we've had all these encounters up here, but I'm saying that to say that when I moved in this house, I knew there was going to be something happening. I knew that my first night here, I was like, I just need to prepare myself. I was like, I need to probably sage the house. I need to do whatever I need to do to kind of purify inside the house, because I know there's going to be stuff outside that I don't have control over. And I moved in this house back in July of this year, so it was summertime. And immediately, probably within a couple of days, there started being encounters outside. And I haven't had anything visual yet, but these are everything you hear when you attribute Sasquatch encounters. I have a dog, and so I walk her several times a day, and we walk around the yard, we walk around the driveway, and I'm up on a mountain. My closest neighbors are down below me, down the mountain, but up above me is nothing. Up above from the back of my house is just thick, just jungle woods, especially in the summertime. I mean, they're vines and briars, they're just impassable in the summertime. The only time you can go in these woods is in the winter when it's all dead. So no one goes up there. None of my neighbors are hiking. They're all older people that, sit on the front porch. There's no younger people. I'm the youngest person in my area, really. And I'm in my 30s. And I would notice, especially very early in the morning, I would take the dog out, and it would just be quiet. Right after the sun come up, it's just quiet. Again, just ear-ringing quiet, unless somebody down the mountain's running a lawnmower or something like that. Just dead quiet. And I would hear tree knocks. And, these just sounded like somebody taking just a huge wooden baseball bat to a tree, just, and it would just echo. And I would hear one fairly close into the woods, maybe 30, 40 yards. And I would hear that one, wow, and then way, way, way high up on the mountain, I would hear a response, wow. And now at this point, I accepted it. And so I would just be like, yeah, out loud, verbally, I'd be like, yeah, I hear you. I'm just walking the dog, leave me alone. And they might do one more, a little short, just pop. And then that would be it. Just a response of all right. It was almost like when we'd come out, it was like they would knock to let the other ones know, oh, they're here. They're outside. Hush. And that happened literally almost every single morning this summer. And a lot of times in the afternoon. Almost every single day. It was like I could plan it. And I even tried to record it, but it was one of those where every time before I would even go outside, I would start my phone recording. I would already start a video. And then, of course, when I would go out there, it wouldn't do it. And as soon as I would think, they're not going to do it, I would stop recording, put my phone in my pocket, pow, there it would go. And it was just, it was so frustrating. I need to just get some sort of camera and set it up. But of course, knowing what I know now, who knows? It's almost impossible to record these things, it seems like. So I heard a lot of tree knocks almost every day. But then there were a few other experiences. One day I went out there and I was walking the dog, and I heard a couple of tree knocks, and then we're down in the yard, and my yard kind of dips a little bit toward the bottom of the yard. So we're down in the bottom part of the yard, and where we're at, it's probably 40, 50 feet from the wood line. We're standing there, and she's sniffing around, and I'm just kind of enjoying the sunlight. And way up above me, up on the mountain, through the trees, I just hear leaves, and a rock. I wouldn't say the size of a silver dollar, a little bit bigger, maybe golf ball size, a little bit bigger than a golf ball, not quite a tennis ball, but bigger than a golf ball. Comes flying through the trees and lands probably 5, 6 feet away from us and just bounces. Boom, boom, boom. And, the dog perks up. She's looking up the mountain exactly where it came from. Her ears are forward. Her nose is going. The back of her neck fuzzes up, and she's a 90-pound pit bull. She's a big girl. And the back of her neck fuzzes up. The base of her tail fans out like she is in fight mode. And normally, we hear leaves and sticks falling, or I have walnut trees in my yard, so all winter we heard walnuts falling. Didn't phase her. She might glance, then she went right back to her business, but she knew this came from something. And that was interesting because she's never reacted like that. And, at that point I was like, all right, y'all, really? Like, I've given you space. I haven't bugged you. Then you're going to start throwing rocks at me. And I kind of, again, I said this, I just say it out loud. Like, I'm like, I ain't got any neighbors that are going to think I'm a crazy person. Like, I say it out loud. It's like, really, guys? Like, come on. That ain't cool. And I don't know if it's the dog. They don't like the dog. I don't know. So I have to kind of pull her because she's still will not move from that spot. She's just frozen looking up there. And I kind of have to urge her on, and we go back in the house. So that night I had run to town. I went to go see some friends, and I come back probably. So when I took her out was probably about 5 or 5:30 in the afternoon. I come back about 10 or 10:30 at night. And normally I never heard any wood knocks at night. It was only during the day. But this night was different. I pull up and I back into the gravel driveway up behind my house. I get out of my car. And it wasn't really a tree knock. It was more of almost like a limb snap. It was like somebody took a big couple of inch around limb and just broke it over their neck. Crack! Up in the woods. And I stop and I'm just listening. And then I hear a whoop, which I had never heard before. And, it just totally took, I got cold chills. I got cold chills talking about it now. It literally was this, it started low, and it was like this rumble. And I can't even replicate the rumble, much less on a recording. But it started with this rumble, and then it just whoop, whoop. And I froze. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm hearing this. I've had the tree knocks. I've had the wood knocks. I've had the limb breaks. I've had the stuff thrown at me. Hunter and I had that snatched out of our campsite. But to hear the whoop, that made it even more real. Like and it did it, God, probably 4 or 5 times. And then, it was just, it was like when he first sees I can't believe I'm making a second Jurassic Park reference. And it's like when he sees the dinosaur the first time on Jurassic Park, just that moment, because on the ridge across from me, I heard a response. And the response was high pitch. It was like this, and I was like, oh my God. It was where I was terrified, but I was also excited. I was like, oh my, I wish I had a recording of this. Like, no one is going to believe this. I listened for a minute, and that was it. That was the only response. That was it. I stood out there a couple of minutes, and then I just decided I'm going to go in. And I always take the dog out right before bed. So I got her before I even put on my clothes for bed. I'm just going to go ahead and take her out. So I put her leash on, and she would not come out of the house. She's always, as soon as she sees me grab the leash, she's like dancing. She's excited. She would not come out that door. She bowed up, planted her feet, ducked her little head down, or big head down, and just locked up. And she just giving me this look through the top of her eyelids, just like, no, we're not doing this. And I finally kind of almost had to drag her outside. And as soon as we got outside and the door shut, she immediately tried to go under my car. And she's never done that as long as I've had her. I've had her for years, and she has never tried to go under my car. This dog was terrified of something. I mean, she was absolutely mortified of what was outside. And she's never been fearful like that, especially of an animal or a human. She loves people. She's never done it, and she hasn't done it since. But it was crazy that she's acting like this right after I hear these whoops. And it worries me because, again, I'm like, I have a big, my back porch has got these big sliding glass windows or doors. And that's the whole one wall that faces those woods. And she was out on that porch when I left. And I don't know, like, these things came and like antagonized her while I was gone through the window. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to make assumptions. But she was just terrified. So those were the really visceral encounters. And I'll finish it off with my most recent one, which, amazingly enough, was literally about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. Can't remember if it was a Friday or a Saturday, but I had been out to go see some friends. I go to karaoke and stay and do that for a little while. So it was probably getting close to midnight. And again, this is wintertime in North Carolina at night in the mountains. It's cold. It's cold out. When I got home, it was probably in the low 30s, if not high 20s. I mean, it was chilly. And I always back in to my parking spot, into my driveway. So I pull up and I back in and I get out of my car, and it's quiet. It's dead silent up here at night. And I get out and I shut the door, and as I turn to my left, when I shut my door, I was facing forward of the car. I was facing toward the direction that the car would be driving. I turn to my left, and there's a ridge. This is the opposite ridge that I heard the response whoop from when I heard the whoop. So this is the opposite ridge. This is straight ahead of me if I turn to my left. And this ridge is about 50 yards, maybe between 50 and 80 yards away. So fairly close, not insanely far away, not, right in my backyard, but also not very far. And it's wintertime. All the leaves are gone at this point. And I just see two just green eyes looking at me from the ridge. Mind you, there's no light source to produce this eye shine. You shine a light on a deer or a raccoon or a possum, they got eye shine, but you have to shine a light on it. These were like self-illuminating, and they look like two Christmas light green balls of light almost. But I could tell they were eyes. They were maybe 6 inches apart, 6 to 8 inches apart, I would say. And I could see they're looking directly at me. They are staring at me. And there's no light to reflect them. That was the part that really, I'm not even going to let my ego get in the way. Scared me. It scared me. I'm like, okay, these are two green, huge tennis ball looking sized eyeballs staring straight at me from about 50 yards away. And the way this ridge goes is it's very gradual, but I know, even in the dark, I know where that ridge is. Growing up here, like seeing these woods, seeing this ridge. So even in the dark, I knew where that ridge was, and there was just enough ambient light on the horizon where I could kind of partly make out where the ridge was, but it was just shattered enough where I couldn't see what the being was, if that makes sense. But I could tell this is 7 or 8 feet off the ground, and it's just looking at me. And it's amazing the irrational things that you do when you feel threatened. And now when I talk about it, I'm like, that was it's just goofy and dumb. But the only thing I could think to do was turn the flashlight on my phone on and shine it. And it's not like this light is going to reach that distance, especially reach the ridge in the woods. So it was really goofy, but it's the only thing I could think to do. Like, maybe I can illuminate something if I just shine this light at it. So I shine the light, and as soon as I bring that light up, boom, they disappear. I mean, it was like it just shut its eyes. And I heard a little leaf rustle, but that was it. And it was just dead silence. And I heard and saw nothing else. And so I immediately came in the house and I called a buddy of mine that was who I had just seen while I was out. And I don't know if he necessarily believes in all of these things. I feel like he's probably a little skeptical, but when I talk about it, I think he just kind of tolerates it when I talk about it. But he was, this time of night especially, he was like the only person I could think to call. So I called him and I was like, I don't know what this was. I don't know what I just saw. I don't know if this was something, you hear people talk about orbs. You hear people talk about seeing balls of light in the woods. And, that's what I thought it might have been. At first, I thought, wow, those were orbs. That's what I saw. But the more I thought about it, I was like, no, these were eyes. Like this was eye shine. They moved simultaneously when it moved, because it was kind of like what it did was when I turned around, I saw it looking at me, and it was almost like it kind of ducked its head down. Kind of like, like if a dog will do if it's trying to like catch wind of something, where it'll kind of dip its head a little bit while it sniffs. And that was almost kind of like what I saw the eyes do, was kind of dip a little bit. And I feel like that may have been possibly what it was doing, was trying to kind of see if it could catch a scent or something. But the way the balls of light moved concurrently, like the way they moved together, very, very much felt like they were eyes. They weren't orbs of any sort. And coupled with the fact that they were so high up from the ground, but the fact that they just, literally blinked out of existence. I mean, it was literally like the thing just, I say that it shut its eyes, but it may have just turned its head away as it went up the bank. And that's probably more likely what happened, that I raised the light and it just immediately turned to its left, but it literally sounded like it turned to its left, took 2 steps, and then that was it. I don't know if it took 2 steps and ducked behind a tree. I don't know if it took 2 steps and blinked out of existence. I don't know what those 2 steps were, but it was just gone. But that was the last encounter that I had. And I would say it was probably the creepiest. I would even put it up there as being creepier than the encounter on the Parkway where the one took the food out of the tree. That one, at least, there was a visual component that just made it really interesting. Whereas this one was just flat out creepy. Seeing eyes looking at you from a few feet away in the woods is never something you kind of want to see, especially when they're that big. Because this wasn't a deer. This wasn't an owl. I mean, again, I've grown up in these woods. I've grown up in these woods going in them at night. I've grown up camping in these woods, and I know what the wildlife looks like at night. I've seen the eye shine. I've seen all that. I've seen what owls look like at night. Yeah, I mean, I've seen them all. And the fact that it was just too big. It was too big to be a deer. It was too big to be an owl. I mean, deer don't have tennis ball sized eyes. If it does, that is a terrifying mutant of a deer. But yeah, I mean, it just, I don't know. I don't know what else it could have been. Especially given all the other things that happened back in the summertime. And it was interesting with the wood knocks and the whoops that they stopped as soon as summer ended. As soon as fall started, they totally went away. There was no more wood knocks, no more whoops. This was the only encounter that I've had since the summertime. And it's odd to me because part of me feels like they could be some sort of, interdimensional spiritual thing. But then the fact that this happened makes me feel like it's migratory. It felt migratory. I mean, it felt like just like when birds migrate, where they're here for the summer, but when winter hits, when fall hits, when food sources dry up, when cold weather hits, when whatever it is, when it's harder to find shelter from the elements, whatever, they leave. And they left. Of course, with my last encounter, it doesn't look like they totally left because there's still something here, but I don't know. I'm at a loss, but I'm very open about these encounters, and I like to share them because I like to see what other people think. Especially in this area. I talk about it a lot in this area because there are a lot of people who have had these encounters, but also feel like they can't talk about them. And it's amazing living where I do when I talk about this, how many people are like, oh yeah, I've seen it in the same area. I was out with friends one time and was talking about the encounter that Hunter and I had, and was told by a guy that, oh yeah, there's supposedly a game warden saw an orangutan up on the parkway. And, to me, I'm like, well, hate to tell you, it probably wasn't an orangutan, but it makes sense that that's what he thought it was. And it's just, yeah, stuff like that. And even what was even more interesting too was one of my good friends that I know. He's an older guy, and he's from the Cherokee Indian Reservation, and he's very, 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 very well versed in Cherokee history, Cherokee culture, Cherokee legend. I mean, he is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this stuff. And one night I was sitting there, and we had all met up at the bar, and we were sitting there and we were talking, and I overheard him talking to one of the other guys about stuff about the Judiculla and those things. And I just kind of piped up and was like, hey, so yeah, I had a really interesting encounter if you're curious to know about it. And he was just like, tell me what happened. And I don't know why, but I didn't tell him where it was. I mean, we were busy. We were at the bar. It's crowded. So I just kind of gave him the brief rundown that, Hunter, my buddy and I were camping, and we heard something, and it come through the trees and snatched our food bag out of the tree that was, 10 or 12 feet off the ground and barreled off through the woods. And I mean, I had to pick my jaw up off the floor because, again, I didn't tell him where this happened. But without missing a beat, he said, well, that's what you get for going up to the Devil's Courthouse. Because he said, my papa used to threaten to take us up there as kids and drop us off if we didn't behave and let the Judiculla get us because it's haunted up there. And I mean, I was floored. I mean, I was like, how did you know that that's where we were? I couldn't believe it. I was just totally in shock. And, I asked him, I said, how did you know that's where we were? He said, Because that's going to happen. You going to go anywhere around here, that's what's going to happen. And I was floored. And just as a side note, where I currently live and have had the experiences I've had is, if you go across the ridge, again, as the crow flies, I mean, to give an idea, my grandfather, when he was a kid, used to hike from where my house is currently to Mount Pisgah, which is way farther than getting to Devil's Courthouse on foot. So, if you can walk from my house to Mount Pisgah, you can walk from my house to Devil's Courthouse. And, if these beings are as big as they are, or as big as we think they are, they can cover that distance in a third of the time or half the time that it would take a person to. So it's just one of the things that the math adds up almost too well. And yeah, I believe that's probably the extent for now. Of course, I've been talking about it this whole time, so I wouldn't be surprised if I didn't have another encounter soon, because I feel like every time I talk about it, I end up having one, which is interesting. It's almost like you draw these things to you, which is why a lot of natives won't talk about it. My grandmother wouldn't talk about it because she always kind of felt like you may draw it to you if you talk about it. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. I can keep you all posted. If I have another encounter, you may hear me on here again. So, yeah, I guess that's probably it for now. Thanks for listening.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, booking A bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Some are going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Some are going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Some are going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, fried chicken, porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.